So this webinar is essentially based on observations that we made over a period of about 12 years, working with organizations. Some of them had implemented Agile. Some of them were successful. Others, it was more like mixed results. A few of them implemented it, and then they reverted back to what they were doing because it didn't work. I also want to stress that there is really a myriad of Agile implementation. It seems that every organization that we have worked with has developed its own. And very often I think it's due to the fact that organizations have tried it out. They realize that it doesn't work. You know, Scrum by the book, for instance, doesn't work, and they modify it, and they end up with something that may work for them, actually. It's not necessarily bad. Making changes is not necessarily detrimental to an organization. Sometimes it's desirable, and an organization certainly has to take into account the way it operates before it adopts changes. So I'll try to summarize. It's not, by no means is it exhaustive. I mean, it's, as I said, it's based on observations that we have made, data that we have collected as part of our activities with clients, and I'm going to try in the seminar to summarize what an organization should take into account before it jumps in and adopts Agile methods. So just as a little bit of a background on Agile, even though sometimes it looks like Agile is very recent, in reality it isn't. It's based on iterative and incremental development, and that's been around for quite a time, over 80 years. Obviously not all in software, but in systems engineering and in hardware engineering. And it's only in in the mid-70s that it started taking root, especially with the advent of the PDP-11 and the VAX computers, and people started to look at, you know, how can we develop software in a more flexible way, and started adopting what is referred today as Agile methods. In 1985, Barry Bean kind of formalized it with his spiral approach, the spiral method, and in the 70s, then it became a lot more popular, and there was a proliferation of Agile methods that came out. We're talking about XP, we're talking about Crystal, Scrum, feature development, test development. Scrum is probably the most popular by now. It's the one that we see the most often. Some of them have come up, and like anything else, they've disappeared, or they're hardly used. So overall, the Agile methods rely on the finding that the face-to-face settings are always better than just exchanging using written communication. And certainly, I think everybody agrees that having a face-to-face can resolve a lot of issues. However, it doesn't mean that the written communication and the documentation is not important as well. And even though face-to-face settings are desirable, it's as long as a client and a supplier have established good relationship, and it's certainly not always the case, then yes, I think we can agree that face-to-face settings are always preferable. I've been working on large programs before where lots of people were involved, and I remember at one point in time, because of the problems that we were having with our client and with our suppliers, and the senior management in the organization issued a directive and said, if you meet a client and if you meet a supplier, you've got to have a lawyer next to you to make sure that no decisions are made that would go against the interest of the organization. And sometimes it's just not possible to have face-to-face. Sometimes you have to rely on written communication to interface with the stakeholders. So if we go over the Agile Manifesto, just summarize it, and I'm going to focus on the 4 items that are showed on the slide here. It basically says that the individuals and interactions are preferred over processes and tools. Well, in principle, that makes sense. It's always good to have a good interaction, establish a good relationship with whoever we deal with, rather than relying on written processes and tools to accomplish something. As a counter argument, I can say that when you're dealing with a large group, there will be a large number of different opinions. And then when you're in that situation, then a lot of time and effort can be spent interacting with individuals, trying to convince them that this is the way to go. So in those cases, written communications may become essential. The second one, working software is preferred over comprehensive documentation. Well, I don't think that anybody would disagree with that. I mean, having a working product is always better than having a documentation that describes a theoretical working product. On the other hand, as a counter argument, maintenance and sustainability will require documentation, because those who develop an application may not be there to maintain it. So whoever inherits it will have to acquire somehow the know-how, the knowledge to maintain it. The third item, customer collaboration is preferred over contract negotiation. Again, it's something that we can hardly disagree with. It's always better to have good relationship than an antagonizing relationship. On the other hand, as the old saying goes, what has not been written has never been said. So sometimes it is better to have a backup to make sure that we do have something written and that we have negotiated. Everybody understands what it is that we're going to do, rather than relying on verbal agreements on what has to be done. And responding to change over following a plan, again, if the plan is wrong and we follow it, then we're going to have bad results. And sometimes in software, well, there are a lot of changes, and it's common that the client or the stakeholders don't really know up front what it is that they want to have. They may have a very vague opinion of what the end product looks like, but they can't really articulate it in a way that the other parties have the same understanding of what this system or this product should look like. When there are too many changes, then that leads to improvisation, and improvisation means uncertainty, and uncertainty means possible. So there's always the same software that comes up. Agile may imply that software is more of a craft, software development is more of a craft than an engineering discipline. So it's something that an organization should probably, before adopting Agile, should probably ask itself, how does it look at software development? Does it consider that, does it assume that it's a craft, or does it assume that it's an engineering discipline? Because if it assumes that it's an engineering discipline, then that means that engineering techniques and engineering methods have to apply. And in